Welcome to the Nurturing Minds podcast,
a science-driven approach to parenting and education.
We are two parents, two scientists, and two people who care deeply about raising kids who are resilient, confident, and happy.
In a world that's becoming increasingly digital, we believe real connection, emotional well-being, and curiosity matter more than ever.
In each episode, we share insights from latest research, our own experiences, and conversations with experts from around the world to help you support the children in your life. I'm Dr. Sonali Dasgupta, a research scientist turned educationist, mentor to talented teenagers, and founder of the STEM Monsters education platform.
And I am Dr. Blanka Kellermayer, neuroscientist, mum of two very active boys, certified parenting coach, and founder of Dr. Blanka Peaceful Parenting.
Hey Blanka, good to see you. Welcome back. I'm so excited to get started on yet another season of Nurturing Minds.
Yes, hi Sonali. It's great to be back. And yeah, I'm so excited that we're back together with a bunch of new and exciting topics to bring to our listeners. So yeah, let's get started.
Let's start. Yes, I'll jump straight in actually, because today's episode and the discussion we are going to have, I know is very personal to you. So let me jump to the topic directly. I know that you have children who have been diagnosed with ADHD at a young age, and they're quite old now. They're 9 years. Presumably your younger one is about 9 now, but he's been diagnosed for a few years, right?
So the 9-year-old is the older one, and he's diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I got that mixed up. But even with, I'm sure that there would have been a moment in time when you would have realized that there is something different probably for your child, prompted you to get expert opinion on. Would you walk us through that?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you started with this, because I think oftentimes when you're parenting, you don't necessarily know what's quote normal and what isn't, because sometimes you're new to parenting. And that was actually our case too. So my older one is the one who is diagnosed with ADHD. And at first, when he was born, and in those early days, we had absolutely no idea. We thought that this was normal, that this was how it's meant to be. And what I mean by that is, so both my husband and I are scientists, and we brought that scientific thinking into our parenting, in the sense that we did a lot of so-called experiments, like trial and error on how to help him sleep, how to feed him, and all of that. And we really quickly noticed that even small changes to my son's routine really messed up a lot of things. And here I mean, if we were off by 5 minutes with his bedtime, then he would be up at 4 a.m. ready to start the day. And then that would mean that he wouldn't eat properly. Then his whole sleep routine went out the window. And it was meltdowns. And then we were like, oh, well, we have to stick very precisely to his bedtime.
Right.
And when we did, then everything was fine. Then he slept through the night, and then he was a much happier baby. And we noticed this from a very young age. So, and we thought that this was, normal. And then at the same time, we saw some other families being out having dinner with their children and with their babies. And it's like, how do they do that? How do they not have to put their kids to
I know, I can get that feeling. I'm so glad you said it, because I still remember every new parent is kind of wanting to maintain a schedule to get sleep themselves. And
Exactly.
then they're always thinking that it's my fault that I couldn't maintain the schedule, or it's my fault that I couldn't put the child to sleep, and the schedule is all wrong. But it's very interesting how you said that it's not just about putting them to sleep, but just observing the entire day in totality and understanding how one thing is leading to the other. Was the early symptom.
Yes, because then it was so interlinked, because if he was sleep deprived, then he didn't have the patience to eat, and then because he didn't eat, then he wasn't full enough to be able to fall asleep. So it was like a whole cycle of goodness. So, and then it would set us off for a week or two until we resettled back. Wow. And at the time I was still doing my PhD, so I was like, I needed proper sleep. So we were like, oh, let's stick to the routine.
I know, I can understand that. I mean, that is something which I'm sure many parents would observe. But having said that, the question is also that when something like this happens and you observe that a change of the routine is actually completely taking the whole schedule and throwing it out of the window, what made you think that it could be something deeper rather than just your child is unable to handle the change of schedule? What prompted you to go deeper into it?
Yeah, so that actually didn't happen until my second child was born,
Oh,
when we realized that he was such a chill baby, and he didn't mind a small shift in his routine. And also, like, with the second child, you've got the older one there, so it's all by default, it's more difficult to maintain
true.
the smaller one's routine. And he was fine with it. And I remember at the time I was quite apprehensive. I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, maintain the baby's schedule and also take care of the
Another
older
baby.
child. And that was when the penny dropped, really, because I'm like, oh, but this baby is completely fine with the change. So now I get like how the other parents managed to go out for dinner in the evening, because if he would have been our first, then that would have been completely fine with him.
Yeah.
So that was when I first started to look into, like, oh, is there something deeper going on here? So my older son was 3.5 at the time. And then in the end, we got him assessed, and he got his diagnosis at the age of 7. So then, as a parent, you're already suspecting that, okay, there must be something going on here. That's why you end up taking them to the doctors.
But I guess he was also fortunate that both of you were scientists, both of his parents were scientists. So you approached it from that very unique point of understanding what is happening. And you actually have a very, very unique vantage point, because not only are you looking at ADHD as a parent, but you also have the expertise of a neuroscientist. So you're able to analyze it. So there's one part of Blanka who's the parent and the mother and the anxious mother, and there's another Blanka who's the calm neuroscientist looking at it, analyzing it, understanding what's happening. So they're two very different perspectives. So how did these two perspectives change in how you approached parenting after you knew, yes, this is what I'm dealing with?
Yeah, so I do have to admit that there were times when I was like, oh my goodness, how is this ever going to be any better? When we had meltdown after meltdown, and then I'm at the last thread of my patience, and it's hard. It's really hard to parent a child who has those additional needs, and then you're always second guessing yourself about, okay, what am I doing wrong here? Is it my fault, or what could I do differently? And I think that's where actually my training as a scientist and my knowledge about the brain helped, because I could take a step back and I could dissociate myself as the parent, the cause, basically, and understand that, oh, there is actual scientific developmental reason behind the behavior, behind the strict need for a routine. And I think it actually served me, it helped me in that sense. There are still moments when, like at the end of a hard day, you're sitting here, like reflecting on the day, and I'm like, oh, this was a shitty day.
And the parent is still there, right?
Exactly. So I don't think, I think it's like back and forth, and then sometimes one surfaces and then the other comes in, and they're sort of like talking to each other.
So I can completely imagine we all play different roles, and we can't dissociate them completely, even if there are times when one helps the other role to evolve. So actually, that brings me to the next question, which I would like to ask you. There's so many myths about ADHD nowadays, especially, where the good thing is that the awareness is increasing. At the same time, every time a child is crying or throwing a tantrum, parents would just label it as something wrong. So there are myths about ADHD as well. And so from that perspective, I would like you to clear it out and give us give us a scientific understanding of what is actually ADHD, so that the parents who don't have the neuroscience background are able to tell when it is actually something that is with the child, happening with the child's developmental stages, versus it is an environmental thing or a behavioral thing.
Yes, so this is a very important question. Thank you so much for asking this. And so ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. In the past, it was labeled ADD, Attention Deficit Disorder. Now it's an umbrella term. And that's because we differentiate different subtypes of ADHD. And these subtypes are primarily inattentive, primarily hyperactive or impulsive. And then the third type is the combined type, when a person displays symptoms of inattention and equally impulsivity or hyperactivity. And so that's basically the diagnostic criteria. But what's going on in the brain? So why is this happening? So we talk a lot about executive functioning in ADHD. And for those who aren't familiar with the term, executive function means basically all of the tasks the brain has to do in order to complete a task. Let's talk about the morning, which is always a tricky time for any family, isn't it? So in order to get, from bed to actually leaving the house, there are a certain number of tasks that need to be completed. So when we talk about executive function, the brain has to remember what needs to be done. It needs to break down the tasks. Okay, first I need to get out of bed. I need to shower, or I need to get dressed. I need to have breakfast. So it's a lot of working memory. And it's the actual task initiation. It's then going through the motion of getting dressed, going through the motion of having breakfast. So basically, every little step the brain needs in order to complete the task. Now, in ADHD, we talk about executive function deficits, and that's mainly because there's a neurotransmitter imbalance. And neurotransmitters are these little messenger molecules that go around in our brain, and that's how our brain cells communicate with each other. And there are a bunch of neurotransmitter systems involved in ADHD, and obviously this is an ongoing research field. So we don't have a very clear understanding just yet. But the two main systems involved are the dopamine system and the norepinephrine, or also called noradrenaline. So noradrenaline, norepinephrine are the same thing. And dopamine is responsible. We've talked about dopamine in the past, and I think many of us are familiar with dopamine as giving us a hit, a reward. So like dopamine seeking behavior, when you're scrolling on your phone and then video comes after video, and it's like that gives you that dopamine hit. That's what draws you in. And there is definitely an imbalance in the dopamine system, which means it's much harder for people with ADHD to start tasks, to stay focused on the task, and then to actually complete the task, to have that working memory, to actually be able to finish the task. So that's one definite cause. And then there's the norepinephrine that helps us stay focused on a task as well. And it sort of shuts down other brain areas that help us, because then sometimes you see a child, you ask them to go and get dressed in their room, and then you go up 5 minutes later and they're naked on the floor playing Legos. And I'm like, oh, because the Lego was there, and then their brain doesn't have that little like screen to like, oh no, the Lego is here. I need to get dressed right now. No, they're like, oh, Lego's here. And then they completely forget that they need to get dressed. And then they start playing with Lego. So yeah. And then another thing that I'd like to mention here is that the brain, the way it develops from embryonic stage and then well into our mid-20s, is that it develops from the bottom upwards. And then in the bottom of the brain are the more primitive areas. And up here we have the prefrontal cortex, which is where executive function sits.
Okay.
And in average term, most neurodivergent children have a 2 to 3 year delay in their brain development, meaning that when you're talking to a 9-year-old ADHD kid, it's like as if you're talking to a 4 or 5 year old.
Yeah. Okay.
Or sorry. My math's wrong there. Yes. So that's why it's so hard sometimes as an adult, because they have a big body, and then sometimes they're able to do it and other times they're not. So it's very inconsistent. That keeps coming up, that there are times when they're able to do it without any problems, and then other times it takes so much effort to get them through a task.
So I'll ask you something actually very interesting here, that you mentioned that the brain development happens all the way up until 24 years. Now, that's the latest study that they say that the teenage brain is developing all the way up to 24 years as opposed
Yeah.
to what was considered earlier. And you said that the prefrontal cortex, or the brain development of children with ADHD, is delayed by a few years. A question out of my curiosity now then is, as we become adults, as these children become adults, does it mean that by the time, let's say, they are 30 or 40 years old, they are in a better situation to cope with their symptoms? Or does it remain the same?
I think it's yes and no. It highly depends on the environment. Many of these can be learned, and that's where the structure is key. Like back to the example of my son. So when the structure is there, and even now, like he needs to be in bed by 8 p.m. Otherwise, he's off again. And he's 9 now. And you think that we'd become more flexible, but he needs that sleep because he's like spiraling all day long. And then if he doesn't get that sleep, then he gets overtired, and then everything just escalates. So back to your question about like how ADHD, like in the long term, when they get in, turn into, when they develop into adults. So if they've learned how to structure that, if they learned how to break down tasks, it can be easy, become easier. Yes. And also, I wasn't planning on talking about medication, and medication is a whole different topic, and maybe we can do an episode specifically on medication.
Sure.
So my son, just for the record, he's not on any medication, and it wasn't suggested to him by the psychiatrist because of the structures we had in place. So, but there are children who definitely need medication, and even adults who definitely need medication. So I'm not against medication. It's a very personal thing, and very much dependent on your child or the adult in question.
I'm really glad that you put that out, because it's important to know that everything that we say and discuss does not mean that it is true in 100% of the cases, and it's on a case-to-case basis. But the overlying structure, the overlying suggestion, the overlying guidance still remains in place. So that actually brings me to the next question, because you talked about a child who goes into the room and forgets that he has to get dressed for school because he sees a box of Legos next to him. And that's a classic case. Now, I'm not sure about the others, but I have seen enough children, and let's say even at an age when they are teenagers, the same thing still happens. So the question that I would like to raise is, there are things that we would see even with a normal child or a neurotypical child, right? Where they just go into their own phase of daydreaming and not doing tasks, or they go into a rage and throw a tantrum in the playground. So how does a parent decide whether that is a behavioral issue, or it is more of a developmental stage problem or issue in the brain which needs a deeper understanding and structure to come out of it? So one is a short-term behavioral thing, and the other is something that needs a much deeper intervention.
Yeah. So I think ultimately every parent knows their children best. And children are smart. Some people, like some people call them manipulative, and I like to call them smart, because they quickly learn, like if they want to get their way, they quickly learn if a certain behavior leads them to get their way, then why not continue the behavior? So I think we need to give them credit for that, because that means that they're smart, that they've recognized how to get from one to the next thing
That's evolution as well, isn't it? They need to survive in this world.
Yes. So your question was how to differentiate between whether this is a developmental or whether this is just behavior about a child wanting to get their own way. And I think the main differentiating factor is the consistency of these happening. Like if this is what happens every time, then that's where I would look into developmental challenges. That's where I might have a chat with the doctor. When it happens on occasion, when your child really, really wants something, then it might just be a case of like, okay, or really, really doesn't want something, right? Okay, maybe we have to work on the relationship here, on how to communicate this in a more effective way that, okay, I can support you. And then if you really want that thing, then here's how we can work on it. So I think that's the main differentiating factor.
Okay.
Also with age, you mentioned teenagers. So if we're talking about younger children, they can't help it. It's involuntary.
True.
I really wanted to talk about emotional dysregulation, but I think we're a bit short on time. But that's a very emerging field within ADHD, which is being more and more recognized. And it's very important because these children really struggle with handling their emotions. So if they get said no, then it's more likely that they'll have a huge meltdown about it. Or if they feel rejected, I'm not going to go into this talking about that right now because, again, we could do a whole episode on that.
Right.
But they can perceive rejection very deeply at a very like even physical level, which then will result in massive meltdowns and behavior challenges. So if you're ever not sure, then just talk to a professional, talk to a doctor, talk to even someone like me. I can help parents like pick things apart and like decide whether, oh, this might be, room for where we might need to go and look for an assessment.
That's very useful. Thank you for that, because I think many parents would have this question of how do I know where we stand? And as you said, is that go and talk to a specialist if at all you feel this is going out of your hand. And that brings me to the next part, because you said they could even go and talk to you. So I know that you run a peaceful parenting venture, and parents come to you and you advise parents on how to navigate through the parenting challenges at every stage of their child's growth. So if a parent were to approach you today, what would be the first shift you would recommend to them when they feel they are overwhelmed with their child's ADHD symptom? And here we're talking about a parent, let's assume that they already know that the child has ADHD and they're trying to cope with it. What's the first thing you would advise to them?
Yeah. So first thing I would tell them is that it's hard. I would just offer some compassion because I think when you're parenting an ADHD child, it can feel very lonely. And you're there supporting and supporting someone through an emotional meltdown is tough. And so I would definitely want to support the parent in that sense that they need to look after themselves. And I know that's really hard. I know from experience, it's really hard. Yeah, so that's where I would start. And then the next thing I would say is I always ask my parents, my clients, to adopt this mindset shift of looking at the child and thinking that he or she is doing the best that he or she can with the resources that they have. Because if we think about this and rather than looking at them as like they're giving me a hard time, no, they're having a hard time. They don't necessarily know how to ask for help and support. But through the behavior, they're communicating to us that they need our help and they're still doing the best they can. So once we are able to adopt this mindset, then we can come in with more curiosity and it's like, okay, what's going on here? Is there like a skill set missing? Are there resources low? Maybe they didn't sleep well. Maybe they had some friendship trouble at school. And there's so many things that can be in the background. So that's where we have to become sort of detectives. I like to call them.
Empathize with the child.
Empathize with the child, definitely. And then come in as detectives on trying to figure out, okay, what's behind this behavior rather than reacting to the behavior. And this isn't easy. I know this isn't easy, especially when you're rushing to get out of the door in the morning and then you don't have time necessarily. But then maybe you can come back to it later in the evening and okay, hey, I wonder what happened this morning. And, start those conversations and get your child involved and ask them like how they felt, what was going on, why they couldn't do it. So you sort of try and see the world from their perspective as well.
Interesting. That was a fantastic starting point, I'm sure. And as you said, even when everything is right, even when you know everything, there will be meltdowns, there will be struggles. So, can you share a few, maybe one or two strategies that the parents can adopt? I know I'm asking a lot from you, but I'm sure that this is the most beneficial part for the listeners out there. Can you share a few strategies that they can adopt at least as a first step to helping with the situation or going through the situation?
Yeah. So I've mentioned mornings a lot. I think that's a big friction point for many of us parenting ADHD children, because we have a very short time and we have a lot of transitions to go through, and then we have an end goal of actually leaving the house to get to school and work.
Yes.
So with that example, one thing that I consistently use in my house and what I highly recommend to parents is like sort of a gamification of the morning. So like we bring play into the picture. And what I like to do is put my son's favorite song on. So if like he goes through phases of having favorite songs, and then I challenge him in a fun way, asking him like, "Oh, I wonder if you can get dressed by the end of this song." And then that gives him
Some kind of a guardrail to follow.
it gives him a time frame, right? Like there's a time limit, but also it's a challenge, and ADHD brains thrive for that dopamine hit.
Oh,
So once like the challenge is there, they can like hyper focus. It's like, oh, I need to get dressed before the song is done. So that really kicks him in. And then he's usually like within a minute, he's up and ready. So it's amazing what that can do, because then he gets that dopamine hit from actually completing the task, which his brain is wanting.
looking for, yes.
Yes. Then another thing that I like to think about is lowering the barrier to start the task. So when we talk about task initiation, like think of a time when the dishwasher is full and then there's just one plate that needs to be washed, and it's like, I'm just going to wash this by hand because I really don't want to unload the dishwasher right now. So if we think of it this way, oftentimes even the simplest tasks are just too high a barrier for a child to start. So how can we lower that? Maybe like you can help them lay out their clothes in the night before, and then it's already there that they don't have to think about what they're going to wear. You can support them so that the first step into starting the task is just that a little bit easier. So then they can just carry on with the rest of the task.
Very, very insightful. Thank you. The music part, especially, I think, and even lowering the barriers, I think it will be helpful not just with parents whose children have ADHD. I think it's a remarkable suggestion for every parent,
But
I would
also
say.
for us, even like
For us,
on the
even,
days,
yeah.
yeah, on the days when we have the music on in the morning, I see even my little one, he's just dancing, like boogieing away. And it's just, like everyone's in a
Getting
much
stuff
better
done.
mood. So then it's much easier for everyone to get out of the house. Yeah.
Wonderful. So this was really helpful, and I'm hoping that the parents who are out there listening to this, they have been able to go away with a couple of immediate things that they can implement to make their life just a little bit more peaceful. And that's what your entire peaceful parenting is about. So I know that when you work with parents, you always give them tangible suggestions and not thoughts, but ideas that they can implement, just like we talked now. And I'm aware that you have built a resource to help them with how do I survive this right here, right now problem. So can you tell us about your free guide? I think you call it Make Everyday ADHD Parenting Feel More Manageable, which is just so apt. So, how can parents get their hands on it and also get back to you in case they want to delve deeper or get your support?
Yes, so I do have this free resource, which is available on my website. We'll add the links to it in the show notes. So this is a downloadable PDF that walks you through some of the strategies that I've talked about, and also some additional ones that I haven't mentioned today, because there's just so much we could fit into today's episode. So feel free to download that, and then it will get sent to your inbox, and then you can have a read, and then you can trial it. And then if there's any questions, I'm always available. You can contact me and then ask for more help and advice, or even just feedback on how it works or how it doesn't work, because I always love hearing from parents on how things land, what works for their children, what doesn't work. And then this is where I get the best ideas sometimes from brainstorming with other parents, that we're in this together. I might have higher knowledge about the brain, but I'm still in the thick of it. My son's 9, so I'm also always constantly looking for ways to make things more exciting, because then ADHD brains crave that novelty and excitement all the time. So things work, and then they don't, and then you try new things. So that's why we need to have that community and keep talking to other parents who are dealing with similar things.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Blanka. I have been waiting to do this conversation for a while, because I know how wonderfully you navigate. And every time we speak, you talk about how you managed a meltdown in the morning, or how you managed a tantrum day before yesterday, and the way you approach it peacefully and structurally with steps in place is just incredible. So I'm sure that the listeners would definitely benefit from your download, the guide that you have made for them. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sonali. It was great talking to you today.
Same here.
Thanks for joining us on Nurturing Minds. We hope today's conversation gave you something to think about or try out in your own life.
If you enjoyed the episode, please follow or subscribe. Leave us a rating and share it with anyone who might find it helpful.
And if there's a topic you'd love us to explore, feel free to message us or leave a comment. We would love to hear from you.
Until next time, stay curious, connected, and kind.